Thank you. Good afternoon. I now welcome representatives of the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. Ms Spence, do you wish to make an opening statement?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I would like to.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to make a few remarks. Before I begin providing you with an update on some of our activities over the past couple of months, I would like to speak briefly to the interim report of the inquiry into Australia's general aviation industry, which we received on Wednesday night. While we will support the department however we can on the government's response to the recommendations, many of the issues and opportunities highlighted are things we agree with and are actioning. I'd like to thank the committee for the work that you have done with the GA industry during the inquiry, and the recommendations you have come up with will add to the work and activity CASA has already underway. As I've said to the committee before, a high priority for CASA management and our board is the GA sector. Preparations to publish a GA work plan by 1 May is well underway, and the work plan will clearly articulate the GA reform activities and time frames for their delivery, with many of the issues highlighted in the report on the work plan. This include matters related to pilot licensing and flying training, flight examiners, maintenance personnel licensing, and reforms to our aviation medicine rules. I'm very happy to provide more details of the specifics if the committee would find this helpful. We are actively engaging with the Aviation Safety Advisory Panel and relevant technical working groups to consider these policy reforms as we value industry's views and contributions to ensure the policy settings are correct. Excitingly, today we announced one of our first activities which will provide relief to aerial work and private operators and reduce compliance costs. This initiative will exempt aerial work and private operators from the mandatory applicability of the Cessna Supplemental Inspection Document Requirements, or SIDS. After consultation with industry, it is intended to come into effect at the end of this month. Mutual recognition is also a big focus of ours. We do already have processes in place to enable the recognition of pilots and licensed maintenance engineers who are trained overseas, and there are already many MOUs and bilateral agreements in place with a number of countries. Most recently, in the maintenance space, we signed an arrangement with the Japanese Civil Aviation Bureau, which will enable reciprocal acceptance of aircraft parts maintained by Australian and Japanese maintenance organisations without the need to hold authorisations from both countries. In terms of our current priorities, in December the new flight operations regulations commenced, which was the biggest regulatory change CASA and the industry has conducted in one go. We didn't discuss this at our last hearing, and I would just like to recognise the efforts of the industry to support us to meet this milestone, and note that we're continuing to work with operators as we progress through transition. With such a significant change, it is not surprising that there will be some unintended consequences, and where these are raised with us, we are determining how we can quickly address the issues. Aviation medicine continues to be a busy area, particularly in the first 3 months of this year, with around 600 applications received each week compared to the average of 400. We have increased staffing levels and made changes to processes to help address the backlog. We also have processes in place for people to escalate time-critical applications. And as I mentioned before, we will soon be engaging with industry on proposed changes to our aviation medicine rules, which include options to develop a new self-declared medical which will directly benefit GA. Feedback I have received so far has highlighted the importance of these reforms. We are also looking at the health of the organisation, and I'd like to draw to the committee's attention the recent decision to establish a People and Culture subcommittee of the board, which will help us progress some priorities around workforce planning, diversity, inclusion and employee wellbeing, as well as looking at the overall culture of the organisation. It is great to see industry return to more normal levels of activity, and we will work hard to support them as they return, and for some, progress with their plans to expand their operations. We'll see a new domestic airline AOC application, and also significant changes to fleet reconfigurations of our major and large airlines. So far this year, I've met with almost 100 members of the industry, mainly from GA, and with COVID restrictions having eased, I've been fortunate to get out onto the grounds and meet with grassroots aviation communities, and I look forward to more of these opportunities. Thank you for the opportunity to make a few remarks, and the executive team and I will be very happy to answer any questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Ms Spence. Senator Mirabella.
Oh, first. Spence, last time you were here, I asked you a couple of questions about the certification of the Blackhawks donated by the Australian Army to the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. You
Yep.
recollect that? It was a brand new issue to me, but as I said to you at the time, to refresh your memory, I made some intuitive comments, which to the effect that as a soldier or former soldier and a current rural firefighter, I could not quite understand why an aircraft designed and built to military specification, designed to be robust, designed to carry soldiers through shot and shell in all weathers, designed for hard landings, how it could be that CASA could not certify these to carry firefighters because of risk.
Yep.
Now, do you recollect what you responded to me at that time?
Look, Senator, if it's all right, I might just give you sort of a bit more background. We've been looking at this in more detail,
Please.
so I'll give you some high-level points, and then following on any questions, Mr Monaghan can also assist. So we're very prepared to work through how we could compare the military safety standard of a Blackhawk to what our regulations require in the civil system. It would be a first internationally, and it will take time and significant resources, and it will mean we require the cooperation of the manufacturer, defence and the operator. And so just for a bit of context, we are talking about aircraft that are 30 to 35 years old, and having been used intensively, they're now at their end of their military life. Through our restricted category type certificate pathway, which we talked about last time, these aircraft can be and have been approved to play an important role in our firefighting capability through water bombing, firefighting equipment transfer and aerial surveillance. But this regulated pathway under our civil aviation regulations does not extend to using the aircraft to carry anyone other than the flight crew or other mission essential crew for the operations in which the aircraft is engaged. Under the existing legislation, so the laws under which we operate, this would only be possible if these aircraft were approved for transport operations, which would require full compliance with the civil airworthiness requirements. So that's the work that I'm talking about, to take it from a restricted type certificate into an actual passenger carrying operation. We do have a civilian fleet of more than 50 helicopters on the register who can provide that service. But that said, I'm very happy to assure the committee that we're working closely with New South Wales RFS and Defence as to get a better understanding of what those aircraft in question, how they are, what their sort of their background is, and the proposed uses, so we can then better understand what is doable under the existing regulations, or potentially what changes to the regulations would be required to undertake the functions you're describing. So that hopefully gives you a slightly more coherent description of where we're up to. So it's not just risk, it is actually the way in which our regulations have been established.
Okay, because last time I think your response was essentially, well, that's the rules.
And it still is, Senator.
Okay, but what you're telling me now is that you're now examining the question of the airworthiness or the wear and tear on the airframes.
So, well, Senators, I'll probably get Mr Monaghan to go into, but it's a bit more than just examining the wear and tear. It is actually being able to say, we can say that these airframes can comply with the civil aviation regulations, and working with Defence and noting that we can actually use these aircraft for other purposes, important purposes for aerial firefighting. What we're talking about here is the transport of firefighters from point A to point B, noting that there are already aircraft that can do that. So that's the context for you, but I'm sure if Mr Monaghan would provide a bit more detail.
I'm Chris Monaghan, Executive Manager for National Operations and Standards. Senator, as Ms. Spence points out, as you also did, they are designed differently from the beginning, so that the work ahead is to compare the design and the airworthiness. It's two parts: the original design and what the mission was for the military, and how that maps across to where you can say, I can effectively assess it against the civilian requirements that we're expected to certified aircraft to carry passengers on. They're designed differently, as you point out. Some of them are more robust potentially in some areas, and perhaps not addressed in their design for something that would map to the civil side. So perhaps maybe a more succinct way to describe it is, if there's 100 things on the civil requirement, perhaps the design is pretty easy to map 50 About 25, this is very general, obviously, 25 might be something that helps us get to the RTC. In the last 25, we don't have information to inform us whether it assesses it or is designed for it at all. And it's what we don't know, which is where the concern is for us, to be able to establish to meet those requirements that we have to. Now, there is a process in the RTC process, which you've noted, that allows you to map some of that across, but it can be a labor-intensive process. But it's not to say that either one of them, but they're designed differently. And you're right, and when you mentioned some of the elements that we consider is how the aircraft is used in a military design mission, and then how it would be used. And depending on how they're used, they do fatigue in a different way, but that would be part of any proposition to us to demonstrate what they know and how that would be mitigated or it's not an issue. Hopefully that helps.
All right. Well, I did a little research since last we spoke, and I came across an article in a journal called Air Attack. Are you familiar with this? I'll table this if you like.
That'd be great.
Now, the original article it runs to quite a lot of pages of colour pictures, so I've had my staff extract just the text.
Yep.
Good.
Okay, and this is written by the editor, whose name is on that document, who would seem to me, to my inexperienced eye, to be a fairly well-credentialed aviator. And the essence of it, well, the opening lines, I think. The UH-60 Blackhawk is one of the safest and most robust helicopters ever built. And it describes a lot of the characteristics of the aircraft, its capabilities, its performance under crash testing, all kinds of things. And I read through this and I came away with a couple of distinct impressions. One is that this, and again, I stress I am not, an aeronautical engineer, but I came away with a distinct impression that and this guy refers constantly to FAA accreditation in the US and seems to imply that our accreditation somehow is based on FAA standards. But my takeaways from this article were that this, by any measure, the safety standards, the airworthiness, the whatever you like, of this aircraft far exceeds most other aircraft used for these purposes. There's also a suggestion that the certification requirements are way out of date and so on. Now, I'm not going to labour on this because I'm not an expert, but I commend this article to you. It's tabled, so it'll be on the record.
I'm happy to review any additional information. I think one of the points I think we made last time, which is most recently, I think last December in 2021, the new Blackhawks, in joint with the manufacturer and the FAA, come with a restricted type certificate, but not a full type certificate right now. So even a brand new out-of-the-box one hasn't been mapped across effectively for them to be able to issue one on a new aircraft yet. But happy to look at what additional information they have in case there's something we've missed or can inform us more.
And Senator, I can assure you we are working closely with Defence because it's essentially because they're signed off on very different arrangements, and it's just, as we said, it's trying to map those across. We're not saying the Blackhawk is not a safe aircraft. We're simply saying what we would need to go through in order to approve to carry passengers, whether it be mission critical passengers who you might say, well, that's just an expansion of the things that are allowed to do under an RTC, but again, that would be a regulatory change for us, and just making sure that we work with Defence to better understand how the two systems are actually comparable.
There seem to be some anomalies, though, in relation to the regulations. For example, in the United States, under FAA regulations, the military version used by forestry services, under the rules, are allowed to carry loggers. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's under their
timber
public...
workers.
Yeah, that's their public use.
Yeah, because the interpretation is that timber workers are mission critical workers for a particular task, but that firefighters are not.
And you're correct that the FAA has explicitly said firefighters not on that mission, but the public use, which is a construct that doesn't exist in Australia, so the latitude what they can work under in the public use is larger and more expansive than we have available to us.
Okay. Well, having tabled that document,
Okay.
I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thanks very much, Senator Mirabella. And yes, I did get quite a bit of feedback too after our last session about that, and specifically about that concept of mapping
Yeah.
the two military and civil regulations and requirements. And I guess the thing is it's you know, everything's doable. It's just the speed in which it can be done, isn't it? And that was, I think, the sense that we're getting is there something that we can do?
And Senator, I do want to just emphasise though the number of aircraft that are available to do exactly what Senator Mirabella is talking about, and part of the feedback that Mr Monaghan and I received were for those operators who do have aircraft that are authorised to do that. So if there was a significant gap in the market, I'd be more concerned than I think what is a process that we can work through with Defence and the New South Wales RFS in the first instance.
So I say, you know, my interest in this is because I'm, you know, this affects me.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that you have obviously taken steps
Yeah.
down this path. As a firefighter, we've never got enough aircraft,
Yeah.
and if the Australian Army is going to be handing over perfectly good helicopters, you know,
Yep.
there's-
We certainly want to make use of them,
Yep.
Senator.
before next summer.
Terrific. I wanted to ask you about the Part 61 RPL and PPL holders and medicals. This has been something that's been going on for about as long as, you know, we've all been alive. Possibly not that long, but it seems that long. I understand that we've got exemptions in place for the RAOs part of the industry, but not for the main part of the industry. CASA's been talking about it for at least 5 years. I just want to understand why we can't yet move to that.
Senator, I'll turn to my colleague in a moment, but just that was one of the things that I did actually mention in the opening statement,
did,
that we're
yes.
very pleased that we should actually be getting something out before the end of this month, setting out some possible policy reforms that would go to the heart of the issues that have been
But you're
raised
not
with you.
consulting again, are you?
Look, Senator, I'll be criticised if I don't consult on them as well. So we'll be putting out some policy proposals that we'll move as quickly as we can to progress. We've been developing them closely with industry, so I'm not talking about let's give it another 12 months and see where we go. But Mr Marcellus?
Thank you, Senator. Andreas Marcella, the Acting Executive Manager for the Stakeholder Engagement Division. So as Ms Spence said, we have been working probably the last 4 or 5 months with an industry working group that's looking to develop what those potential reforms are. And one of those is a similar scheme to what we have in the RAOs world, where you operate under a driver's licence medical with some restrictions. But we have, over the last couple of years, made quite a few reforms already, and I think some of them have delivered the benefits we'd hoped. But some of them have still got some prickles on them. So a couple of years ago we introduced a GP medical, which opened up an ability to go and see any GP for a medical certificate, and that's working really well. If you've got no health conditions at all, they just do a black and white assessment, costs you $10, and you walk out with a certificate. Where it gets more tricky is for people that do have conditions that need to be managed, and for those ones, what we're doing is really having a very strong push to allowing the decision making to be made by the medical experts out in the field rather than by CASA. So we've authorised all of our what we call designated aviation medical examiners to conduct assessments for private pilots, so for Class 2 medicals, and issue those on the spot if there are not 2 or 3 excluding conditions. But what we're finding is that about a quarter of our DAMEs have taken up that initiative and they're actually doing that assessment, but the bulk of them are still referring issues to us. So we're working on that. So we've got a couple of streams of work that will get to the issue that I think you're raising, including the self-declared one. Yeah.
So when you say they're still referring to you and you're working on that, what do you mean? That they don't feel confident to make their own decision, or they don't understand that the circumstances have changed?
So it could be a combination of all of those. What we think is the issue, and we're working through that now, is that some it's extra work for them. So it's easier to say, look, refer it to CASA, they'll assess. Sometimes we're finding people don't like to deliver bad news, so it's easier to say, give that to CASA to tell you that there's some bad news rather than doing it. Some of them are concerned about liability, so we're working through those couple of issues at the moment to find how do we encourage more DAMEs to take the role on and do the assessment in the surgery. And like I say, 25% at the moment. Our principal medical officer is working through a program at the moment for how do we encourage them to do more. And our intention is that regardless of whether you go down a path where you self-declare or where you go and see a GP or whether you go and see a DAME, that in that private flying space, CASA really doesn't get involved unless there's some really serious or unusual circumstances involved.
And
So
then more around how do we make sure that someone can fly?
can fly, yeah,
rather
with
than stopping
appropriate
them.
restrictions, if need be. But the mantra is, how do we find a way for you to fly safely, as opposed to stopping you fly? That's the mission that we're working under.
Yeah. So other jurisdictions like the USA, UK and others have already made these changes over 5 years ago. What is it that Australia is so special?
So probably 2-3 years ago, when we made our last round of changes, we considered the US model in particular. And the way that model works is you have to have passed a full assessment by a designated aviation medical examiner for your initial assessment, and then your subsequent renewals can be down a simpler path. At the time, we thought that it would be more beneficial to go down a path where you don't need to see a specialist at all. You just go and see a GP. So we went down the path of enabling what we call a basic class 2, which is issued by any GP against an OSRO standards. And like I say, we thought at the time that would deliver a greater benefit, and it has for the people that don't have any kind of medical situation at all. But it hasn't delivered it for the area where there needs to be some judgment about the risk involved. So we've been making incremental steps, and 2 or 3 years ago when we made that reform, we thought that path was better than the one that the US did. But we are looking at it again now, and the working group that's met about 4 or 5 times now has doctors on it, it has pilots on it, and we're probably a couple of weeks away now from putting some policy positions on the table for broader input.
Okay. I guess, everybody in the industry's heard some challenging stories about, reobtaining medicals. One where CASA had a case against where the expert witnesses were actually the people that CASA had used to write some of the standards, and then still argued that they were not qualified to make the recommendations that this particular pilot would be able to fly again. What assurance can you give me or give the committee and the industry that you're genuinely in a framework where you're trying to get people flying as opposed to having a very cautious approach?
Yeah. No, I'd absolutely give you that assurance, Senator. And I've invited anyone that has an issue today to let me know, to let our principal medical officer know, and we'll look at it. But the general principle that we're working down is for a Class 2 certificate, we really don't want to be looking at them. We want DAMEs, doctors out in the field to be making those decisions. We've narrowed it down to 3. There's only 3 conditions where we won't allow a DAME to make a certificate or an on-the-spot certificate without referring to us, and they are dementia, epilepsy and psychosis. If you don't have one of those 3 excluding conditions, your DAME is empowered to make the call. And our job now is to encourage DAMEs to do that and not refer them to us, and we've got to make sure that we're not second-guessing.
25% have approved. Is this saying that 75% of our pilots have a psychosis, epilepsy or dementia?
No,
I'm just intrigued why they're not running towards it. Given
That's why we're working the way we are with the DAMEs, to better understand what it is that's preventing them from actually using the power that sits with them. But we have had some interesting examples. Only recently, the pilot with type 1 diabetes, which is something we've never been able to approve before.
First time in Australia about a month ago. It was in the first week of March. We had a captain on a commercial airliner in Australia operating with type 1 diabetes and a Class 1 medical, and that's the first time we've been ever able to approve that. So it was a proud moment. So the attitude to get people flying, like you say, is absolutely there.
So we are, look, you know, it's been a long time coming. It's been a very, very far too long time coming. Congratulations on finally moving towards it. So you reckon within a couple of weeks you should have something to industry to move towards, you know, some sort of equivalency for, certainly for RAOs, but even the sort of, you know, commercial licences that truck drivers have, or, you know.
Well, that's what we've got with the basic Class 2 is with it, yeah.
We have that today, yeah. So if you can qualify for a commercial truck driver's licence, a GP can give you a medical on the spot, effectively, and that's in place now. But you've got to be able to pass that without conditions. But absolutely, we're working on what else we can do.
Okay. Just, I really hope that I won't now get flooded with people saying that that's not accurate. So, you're very confident that this is, you're being straight, that these are medicals that are going to be in place, that you're going to be back to industry within a couple of weeks, and we're going to see genuine reform of the medical system, because I don't like then being flooded with responses and then we wait another 6 months and then I pounce on you with something, which Ms Spence and I have had a frank conversation about me not pouncing. It's not reasonable, so I'm trying very hard not to do that in future.
Thank you. But more than happy for you. Anything that comes to you, send it to us, and I'll give you my word that we'll look at each individual case that you send us.
Well, and we don't want to do that, do we? What a pain. Well, you know, how slow that would be for you. We want industry reform, not case-by-case reform.
Agreed.
But we've heard some awful stories as well, and it is really distressing when we've heard what some people have gone through. So we're certainly very committed to trying a way to make life a bit easier for people who want to fly.
All right. So my final question then, on the basis that I'm not going to get a whole lot of pilots now send me messages about that this is not what's happening, is Lismore. And I understand that there were emergency airlift relief that were grounded during the emergency, and I just wonder if you could talk me through that, please.
I'm actually not aware of...
There's a gentleman behind you who looks like he might be aware.
Yeah. I'm aware of some actions we took to support, but...
Thank you, Chair. Rob Walker, I'm Executive Manager for Regulatory Oversight Division. I think you're referring to during the recent flood relief activity up around Lismore and northern New South Wales. We granted a 7-day exemption to a particular operator to use the CH-47 Chinook helicopters. That exemption was granted under provisions that allow us to, in a case of where a state of emergency has been declared, allow them to modify their operating permissions. Specifically, that aircraft isn't designed to carry freight. The approvals it had in Australia were for firefighting. The water tank that was normally fitted to that aircraft for the fire season had been removed prior to the aircraft was being prepared to be transported back to the United States. An approach was made by the operator. We considered the approach and obviously the gravity of the situation, and we acted quickly within a period of about 8 hours to make sure they had the necessary permissions, and that was granted for them to do that work.
But I'm not aware of any activity where we've precluded anyone from operating. That's the only example that I can think of where we actually used our powers in a way we hadn't actually done before to support activity in the area.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Did you send anybody up to any of the flood zones to understand what activities were happening, what needed to...
We didn't send anyone up, but we did contact operators in the area just to make sure we didn't inadvertently send someone off to do sort of a surveillance activity for someone who'd been flooded out or anything like that. And I think, Mr Walker, you've got a bit more, do you have a bit more detail?
Yes, certainly. So in terms of actually our staff on the ground, as you'd appreciate, we've got a national footprint. A number of our staff are actually personally impacted by the flood situation, not just in northern New South Wales, but obviously in the Brisbane, southeast Queensland area as well. the role that we took there was very much one of offering a hand of help to operators. A number of operators, you point out, and a number of smaller airdromes and aero clubs were impacted, their members were impacted, a large number of aircraft have effectively been lost by the floodwaters.
I didn't hear about that. That's no good.
Yeah, no, there's some fairly dramatic photographs getting around of, rather sadly aircraft tails pointing out of the water. We've been very much forward-leaning and trying to offer support where we can, including allowing people to operate from temporary bases where they've deemed it appropriate, and also just giving them as much latitude as we can to assist them get back on their feet.
Yeah. We had some questions earlier today with the department about approvals for airports and activities on airfields. And the department was talking about taking advice from various agencies about, what's useful, and I just wanted to ask you, the airports that aren't covered by the Airports Act, those ones that are council and privately operated, who do I go to find support for general aviation and encouraging small business and flying schools and engineering businesses to remain on airfields? Because I understand that's not CASA's role then, if you're safety. Who is going to promote that part of the industry?
I think, as Ms Brown indicated earlier this morning, the department does take advice from a lot of different sources, and I would have thought while there might not be a government entity that's looking at that, things like the Deputy Prime Minister's initiative to have a general aviation advisory network, you've got a great source of different types of operators who can really talk about the things that are impacting on either preventing or providing opportunities for the GA sector. We use our aviation safety advisory panel while they provide us advice on safety. If there is an issue that they can see that might be impacting on GA, they'll raise it with us and would pass that on to the department as well. There's the work that the department does with the state, their state counterparts in the planning departments, which is the National Aviation Safeguarding Framework, which again provides a way of actually making sure that planning decisions don't inadvertently impact on aviation activity, but that's probably as much as that I can think of. I'm so sorry, Senator.
I think it's something that we all need to turn our minds to, and I appreciate it's not necessarily your responsibility, but I will keep raising it with every agency until I get some wins. Finally, I have had somebody come back to me. It was about the Blackhawks that weren't able to operate during the Lismore, carrying passengers during the Lismore floods.
We certainly didn't get any requests to carry passengers.
Right.
I think there was some activity which might have involved them doing...
The ones that they do have are firebombing. I'm not aware of any requests to carry passengers on it.
During the floods?
Right, correct.
Okay. All right, well, no doubt I'll get some more detail on that and I'll be able to write to you. I think finally, it's the air operator certificates. I'm getting a number of people come through and say if you have multiple corporate entities underneath your air operator certificate that you're having to apply for multiple air operator certificates. They've engaged lawyers to try and read through the regulations and the circulars, and how do we make it easier for people not to have to pay a bloody solicitor in order to understand what's safe and what the regulations mean?
We have had a few issues with the transition to the new flight ops regulations, people having to submit what we've inadvertently created, a 35-page AOC application, which we're obviously looking at to streamline. Once we've got this information in this first time round, it is going to be much easier going forward, but it's getting the data into our systems. But we're looking at everything that we can do to streamline the systems that we have in have in place.
that we created with the new regulations?
Again, it's a combination of the regulations, new systems that we have, but it is important that we've got the details about who operators are and what they do. And once we've got that into our system, it'll be much easier going forward. But certainly there have been, as I said, there have been some unintended consequences for the flight ops regs, and that's what we're working through with industry now.
So how long do you think it might be to resolve that?
Mr Walker, I don't know.
Senator, just while Mr Walker's coming up, the other thing we've done in the last couple of weeks is publish some sample manuals, operations manuals, that operators can just pull off our website and adapt to their own operation. And the feedback we're getting from operators is that is making a huge difference in terms of understanding what exactly they have to do. And that's been published, literally 2-3 weeks ago.
Well, that's very exciting, because one of the complaints I had is that people would get assistants to write their manual and then they'd have it reviewed by somebody else and CASA and be told, no, that's all wrong, you have to... Well, that's very good. Congratulations. That's groundbreaking.
Thanks, Chair. No, further to the responses, yes, we're very much alive to the fact that it has become somewhat problematic for a number of operators. The way the cycle works, the AOCs are renewed on a monthly basis, depending who the operator is, but they're on a 2-yearly cycle. We're doing a couple of pieces of work. One is to actually look at the periodicity of it. In other words, do they need to fill in more paperwork for us as regularly as they do? That'll be a slightly slower piece of work. The more immediate that we're trying to do is to make sure that we don't repeat this on a monthly basis. So I'm confident that we'll see improvement within the next month, so the next month cycle for AOC renewals.
Okay. So if I had a company that had an AOC and then they have other entities around them of which other people are employed underneath those other entities, we're not going to have to get multiple AOCs for those other entities to, those other people to fly on the first AOC. That's
certainly not the intention. I mean, I obviously would need to look at individual cases and more than happy to assist where we can. But the intention is to make the process as straightforward as possible, particularly as we realise industry has been in a challenging situation with the return to activity after COVID.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the space that's most busy, isn't it? You know, the explosion of private jets and charters and, you know, this is the busiest space, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And it obviously presents a challenge for us as well as industry. Can just reassure you that we're very alive to the fact that there's a lot of people trying to do a lot of things very quickly. It doesn't matter which sector or which part of the industry you're in, from obviously the large passenger transport through to smaller operators. We're very much engaging now to try and get through our work as quickly as we can to assist them.
They're just not new activities though?
No, so
it might be an organisation that's buying a new aircraft or trying to align under the new regulations. They're spending thousands of dollars on lawyers to read the regulations. I'll bring you some specific ones, but, you know, just more generally, once again, in a situation where we're just costing industry money to not get a safer outcome, just get more paperwork.
Yeah, our intention is very much to put fresh eyes on a lot of these things that we have been doing historically and make sure that we are far more responsive and do provide a better level of service to industry.
And one of the other things that we did in the lead up to the flight ops regs, which again was new for CASA, was rather than put out reams and reams of material, we reduced what we called our differences tables, which really just said to industry, here's, you know, there's a lot of new regs that are coming into effect, but this table sets out the things that have changed and the things that you need to focus on, and they're the things you need to look at your manuals to update. And so we did try and make it as easy for industry, and we actually had a technical working group set up under the Aviation Safety Advisory Panel to help us work out how best to communicate with industry. So we were testing it through that group. So, you know, I would not say by any stretch of the imagination is it all perfect, but you've got a team of people who really are looking for ways of doing things differently and trying to find ways that make it easier for industry to continue to fly.
All right. Well, I'm so pleased that you've read the General Aviation Inquiry recommendations. There was a lot of work went into that, and I think there was a lot of good issues, and I will be looking forward to, you know, working through those and seeing how we can progress. I think that's it. Please go with our thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.